Go ahead.
Just starting the recording.
Okay. I'd like to call a joint meeting between Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority, Scioto Valley Fire and Rescue, and Western Lane Ambulance District to order. Would you stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of
America,
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hopefully everyone can see this beautiful flag behind me. That was created and donated by Mr. Craig Sanders. I'm sure many of you know him. Made out of wood, simply beautiful. It does look like it's got waves in it. Actual presentation was recorded and he will be showing that at a Rotary meeting. So I know many of you are Rotary members, so hopefully you'll get to see that. He made another one and presented it to the police department. Each flag is unique. So if you have a chance, come by admin and check this flag out. Mary, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Director Farnsworth.
Here.
Director Yesney.
Here.
Director Webb.
Here.
Director Russell. Director Murphy.
Here.
Director Hickson.
Here.
Director Polisi.
Here.
Director Green.
Here.
Director Burns.
Here.
Director Spade.
Here.
WLFEA directors. Director Russell. She's not in. Director Spade.
Here.
Director Polisi.
Here.
And Director Murphy.
Here.
So we have quorums for all three agencies. Now we'd like to open it up for public comment. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment? Hearing none, we'll move on. We have two presentations this evening. First of all, we'll have an opportunity to recognize one of our employees, or ex-employees, former employees, followed by a presentation from our guest tonight from Lane Council of Governments. First presentation has to do with the recognition of one of our longtime members, volunteer and a career for a while. And just briefly, I'd like to give some background for those not familiar with various federal grant programs that are available to fire departments. So within the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, there are multiple funding opportunities available to fire departments. Most important one for us is the AFG, or Assistant to Firefighters Grant Program, which we've taken advantage of many times in the past years, buying things like fire hose and wildland firefighting equipment. And there's also other programs within that grant, including support for a volunteer recruitment and retention coordinator position. And the grant provides funding for 4 years to help volunteer fire departments increase their numbers and retain their volunteer firefighters. And we use the funds to hire Pete Warren as our volunteer recruitment and retention coordinator. And we were also able to provide training and equipment for new volunteer firefighters, not only with Scioto Valley Fire and Rescue, but with Mapleton Fire Department and Swiss Home Deadwood Fire Department as well. So he was supposed to be on here. Pete, are you on? I don't see him on. I gave him the plaque today. We got him a plaque. I gave it to him. He was supposed to hold it up on camera so we could see him. So we were going to recognize Pete Warren as our recruitment and retention coordinator. If he comes in, we'll put him in so we can see his plaque. So we'll go on to our next speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jacob Callister. He works with the Lane Council of Governments. Now, as you remember, we're considering using LCOG to assist us with our strategic planning process. And he is here tonight to describe that process and answer any questions you might have. Oh, 1 second. Sorry, Jacob. There is Pete. Can everybody see Pete? Pete, hold up your plaque.
Looks like he's still connecting.
Yeah, he's still connecting.
Okay, we'll just take a few seconds. Sorry, Jacob. We'll get you in here in a second. Can you hear us, Pete? Yeah, I can. Well, can you hear us? Like he's busy eating dinner. Pete, can you hear us? Hold your plaque up. I don't think you can hear
Not
us.
your fork.
Yes. What's for dinner? Pete, hold your plaque up. Okay, we did get him a plaque, and we'll try and show that. Okay.
Thank you.
Great moments in Zooming.
Okay. So again, I'll introduce Mr. Jacob Callister from Lane Council of Government, LCOG, and he's going to talk about the strategic planning process. Yours, Jacob.
Thank you, Chief Schick. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be with you here tonight. Thanks for the opportunity. As Chief Schick noted, I work with the Lane Council of Governments. I have been with LCOG for about 15 years. I'm a principal planner there. And so I essentially lead our planning team. The Western Lane Fire and EMS, I guess the Western Lane Ambulance and Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue are member agencies of the Lane Council of Governments. So you make up that Council of Governments. And so we provide assistance of all sorts to our member agencies. And that includes planning services. So that includes land use planning, natural resources planning, transportation planning, economic planning, and a lot of that involves facilitation. And so we do not specialize in, frankly, I wouldn't say that we specialize in too many things. We have a lot of members who have a lot of needs, so we provide assistance. I can with full confidence say that we have the skill set and the expertise to provide facilitative assistance in a strategic planning setting. And so when Chief Schick reached out this last summer, we're always very eager to help out our member agencies. And so we got a very strong and clear message from Brenda, our executive director, that we should definitely be responsive and see if we can't help. And so we put something together that I believe you should have in front of you. Hopefully you've been able to take a look at it at least a little bit, a proposal that we put together. A little bit of history on the, it's December, that was June. We sent that proposal across, and then we didn't hear much, and just assumed that the board had determined a path forward. We then heard from Chief Schick just a couple of months ago that like everyone else, 2020 was very distracting, and that you were sort of circling back to the matter, which is totally understandable. What we mentioned to Chief Schick, however, was that in the interim, we had also picked up quite a bit of work, and there were a lot of needs, whether it was related to the wildfires or just some of the specific needs that some of the other members had over the winter, including quite a bit of grant response related to the CARES Act. That our capacity was actually quite limited, in that if we could help, we would love to help, but that it would have to happen probably no sooner than the spring of 2021. And so I want to sort of lead with that. And I don't know if that is a message that you have yet heard, but that's work that we really couldn't do until at least the spring. And we would hope to engage in that as soon as possible if you all thought it was a good fit. So the proposal that you see in front of you is essentially the way that we scope this, and the way that we often scope this when we don't have a perfectly clear picture, is that we provide sort of alternatives, a bit of a menu. And so we understand it to be an update that the Western Lane Fire and EMS undertakes a strategic planning process, that the last strategic planning process was done in 2018, and that it's time to repeat that process. But that the basic structure was sort of what we used as our kind of initial framework for, well, what have these strategic plans looked like in the past? How have they addressed needs? And it seems like a pretty standard model that we often see, where we're establishing a vision, a mission, we're establishing goals, and then we're establishing objectives, which are measurable objectives to accomplish the vision, mission, and goals. So the way that we laid out the proposal is essentially, you know, anytime we engage in a process like this, we're looking to answer three primary questions. One is, what is it that you want to achieve with the plan? Again, we have the historic strategic plans to give us a little bit of a sense of what it is these plans do, what they lay out. We want to know who the entities want to have involved in the process. Again, that plan provides a little bit of at least basic understanding for who the stakeholders have been historically, and essentially what makes up that group. But one of the levers related to this sort of scalability of the proposal is definitely to what degree will stakeholders be involved? How far and wide does that outreach go? And then, of course, establishing the process itself. Facilitation of this kind is really built around just establishing an understanding about a process, and then providing that neutral facilitation to help these groups work through decisions that they're trying to make, and goals that they're trying to set, and ultimately achieving a vision. So what you'll see in there is this sort of low, medium, high. Those low, medium, high are essentially the degrees of involvement of the Lane Council of Governments. They all sort of match with what I would think to be the time frame. So something on the lower end wouldn't take quite as long, maybe 2 to 3 months. It would be a lot of leadership meetings, a lot of interaction with the board and with the various leadership of the 2 districts. There would be some degree of outreach to other entities, but that would be sort of spilling over into that medium category, where we're then reaching out to more what I would think to be the more traditional stakeholders that we've seen, for example, in the existing plan. And then that higher level is sort of reaching out further, facilitating more outreach, maybe executing things like surveys or other instruments that take a further reach, but there's going to be an associated cost and a bit more time that would be related to those. And so we hope that that's useful. The other thing that is built into that proposal is that we have heard about a sort of discrete task that really might be ripe at this point, that the 2 districts have over time. And one of in fact, we call it out in the proposal specifically, that one of the objectives from the previous strategic plan was to really look closely at this idea of a merge between the 2 districts, to evaluate that process, to establish in a more sort of deliberate and methodical manner the pros and cons, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats related to something like that specifically. And so it's written into the proposal as a bit of a discrete task, and we would want a bit of direction as far as how that might be elevated in that process, or if you're still on track to have that conversation and still would like to. So I view LCOG as having, a big advantage, again, with LCOG is that the districts belong to the Lane Council of Governments. So we're local. We work on the coast significantly. I have spent time in the city of Dune City as a planner, and in Florence. We're working with the port currently right now to work on their business strategic plan. And so we like to think of ourselves as local and having some insights that maybe outsiders might lack. The skill set that we can bring is supporting and designing forms of outreach. We have lots of experience in process design. We have staff and experience in convening and facilitating, which would be an important piece of this. Research and analysis to look at some of the related variables and looking at, frankly, the results of those events. And then lots of experience in preparing plans and supporting an adoption process. And so those are things that are built into that proposal. And I think that is the speech that I have, and I'm happy to attempt to speak to some of the things in that proposal. Again, the proposal was written about 4 or 5 months ago, and I've familiarized myself with it again. And it's work that we would need to wait another few months to do, but very happy to describe our team and any other questions you might have about a potential strategic plan facilitation process.
And I did have some example of their work. I tried to put it in onboard. I don't know if everybody's been able to get that. I will forward, I'll forward that email to all the directors. And there's several examples of the work that LCOG has done, Jacob's done. So questions from the directors for Mr. Callister?
I did just have one. I noticed in the proposal that we have, it says estimated time, and they all begin in August. But you mentioned June. Would it be June, or is August more?
That's actually August of last year.
Yeah, that was so.
Oh, yeah.
Our original proposal we prepared in, I think,
Gotcha.
early July, and so no. what I told Chief Schick, and we got ourselves into a number of projects that essentially all have a completion date around May. And so just, I didn't want to overpromise. And so I indicated to Chief Schick that we would do our best job in spring, is when we could really engage and provide the service that the project deserves. So I would think
Jacob, what are you considering spring?
Yeah. I think May is probably the safest date, but I do think that in April we could engage in some of the initial steps, like putting, if we decided to, well, we could engage in an IGA, for example, at any point, frankly. If the board decided that this was something that they wanted to pursue, we could work on a scope, we could enter into an IGA, and we could just have a planned start date that could be April, I think, with some initial steps. May would be the time that I would want to do sort of the bigger pushes, where we would have events where we were trying to staff and really be focused on the Western Lane Fire and EMS. So May is the spring I'm thinking of, but April could be a ramp up time for the project.
Can you answer with a description what lower, moderate, and high scope alternatives means?
Yeah, so the essentially at its essence, and if you look at the table there, essentially the low category has fewer X's than any of the other categories, right? Those X's indicate that this is a task that we will include. And the concept here is we would do some work to develop a scope. This isn't something that I think would be specific enough to base a scope of work on, where, for example, the board decides, well, we want to do the low, sign a paper, here's the scope. We would say, okay, it's a tool for discussion for the board to say, well, we want these elements. It's looking like the low end would get the job done for us, maybe not. The medium includes more engagements. So you'll notice that with the medium as opposed to the low, there's quite a few more work sessions. So that just means more focus. If one of the districts wants to have a specific work session related to their needs, then we're getting into that medium category where they're just more meetings. And then the high is kind of setting the bar out there, but the purpose of laying it out this way is to give you a sense for a continuum, and we could establish exactly what that scope looks like. It's hard to scope things exactly in a very early phase, and so it's trying to give you a sense for how we would go about it and what we think the kind of price sideboards would be. So high engages more, low engages a little bit. It would be kind of your nuts and bolts. Let's update what's in here. Let's have some meetings, look at the vision, look at the mission, have some very explicit tasks kind of in and out. Whereas the further you move along into the medium and high, it just gets a little bit more involved and casts a wider net.
Okay, and so the first time that you folks would be available would be April. You're not available any earlier in 2021?
If we were in a position where the board had determined that the only way that this really works for the board, we could entertain some options for an earlier start. And I think I mentioned this to Chief Schick. My job as the principal planner and essentially supervising and managing the work of those in our division is to try to make sure folks have a reasonable workload, that we can provide sufficient attention to the work that we're doing. We are pretty agile, and so if the need arises to do that start a little bit sooner, then we make it work. And so I don't know that if the board said we really have to start this earlier, there would be a hard no from us, but it would be a conversation on our end. I have to, we wouldn't hire for something like this, so we'd use the resources that we have, and we would just have to try to make sure we're not overextending. And part of that is just a sense of integrity for what we want to provide to you. And when we get overextended, it can be hard to perform at the level that we want to provide to our clients.
Any other director comments or questions?
Just a question. Looks like the most significant differentiator with the high level is, of course, the planning and discussion around the idea of consolidation. The scope is, though, open for discussion, correct? I mean, if we wanted to engage LCOG to really help out with seeking community opinion, and if that is in there, my apologies for overlooking that. But I think that probably, if that is a direction to consider evaluating, defining how we want to approach this and involving, as you say, all the stakeholders, but the community, and that could involve quite a bit of time, and thus I'm sure resources and money as well.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. And the stakeholders is sort of how we've fairly loosely defined the more complete end, and stakeholders can mean a lot of things. The way that the existing plan defines stakeholders is fairly discrete. I mean, you can see outlined in that appendix the different groups that were identified discretely as stakeholders. Outreach to the general public can be a tricky thing because it's hard to know best how to feel like you've gotten some kind of a representative sample or feedback. But some of the best ways to do that include surveys. You come up with some kind of a statistically significant approach to a survey to try to get at insights. You may all have tools or mechanisms that you have in place now that could be useful to that. We are accustomed to that, and that would be a more involved engagement, but it's work that we've done before and could help with.
I have a question, Chief.
Sure.
Who is the representative from the fire department, the ambulance district on LCOG?
I don't believe we have one. An individual.
Okay. And then Mr. Callister, I'm just curious, who's the representative from the coast on the board, on the executive board?
I don't presently know, but I can find out in a jiffy.
Well, no, you don't have to find out in the jiffy. I was just curious.
I'm trying to imagine the picture up by the receptionist's desk, which changes on occasion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jacob, you mentioned with the interaction with the community and the stakeholders, you might be able to do a statistical survey. Is that something that you could do remotely before we formally start meeting? I mean, is that something that we could move up in the schedule? I think in the boards, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of heard some strong opinion that people wanted to have, we wanted to have some community input and stakeholder input, but it seemed like if you could do a statistically valid survey, that might be something that could be done before we even start meeting and gather that information.
I think as a discrete task, that would be entirely possible. And I think that's really smart that you'd go in, number one, you wouldn't be waiting on it. It would be something that had been recently completed and would be a nice foundation to begin with. So that is something that we could certainly scope. And I think we could begin that early, and that could be a way to begin without beginning in earnest. That would be a sort of a big lift in the design, and we would need some feedback and assistance in the sort of questions, or I guess buy off in the least, and then it sort of works for us. It's out there coming back to us, and we can report back when we engage in the process.
While we're chatting, I've gone to the website, your website, and I'm suspecting that maybe the board member list is not current. Bob Snedden is listed as the Western Lane Ambulance District representative. Maybe he's still serving in some capacity, but there are slots for City of Florence, the Port District, Dune City, Western Lane, Stanislaus Valley, and most of those are at least reported presently as vacant.
How about Mr. Green? The reason why I was asking is about who's on the executive board. I believe in LCOG's bylaws, it calls for somebody from the coast to be on the executive board.
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
Could I make a suggestion that on old business, we swap items B and C? We do the strategic plan before we talk about the local option.
Sure.
And Jacob, could you hang out with us and be part of that conversation? Because I'm sure it's going to get quite a bit more in depth, and you might be able to answer questions for us.
Sure. Yep.
Let's finish this conversation under that, please.
Sure. Will do. Thank you, Jacob. Okay. Moving on, we're going to, Pete was going to show us his plaque. You're on, Pete. Maybe.
Not.
There we go. There we go. There. Thank you, Pete. I don't know if any directors would like to say anything. I know, Ned, you worked with Pete for many years. And
So Pete, you're muted just in case you were saying something.
Have to speak. All the dogs are barking right now. Well, what's new?
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Pete.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I sent a personal message to BOA a few days ago, but essentially what it came down to was that, I had the the privilege of serving under him at Station 2 when he was a captain, and he was just, phenomenal in training and support as a young, well, I wasn't young, but as a new firefighter. And I always really appreciated that. And when he became recruitment and retention, I knew that he would do a great job because he is just so good with people. And I'm glad to hear that he's continuing in the volunteer capacity because he offers so much, and it's been such a privilege. It was a privilege working with him, and it's a privilege to continue to having him as part of the department. And we really appreciate all that you've done and all that you continue to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ned. Yeah, it was enjoyable. Unfortunately, the last year was not so great because of COVID. I couldn't get out there to do recruiting, but it's nature of the game right now. So
yeah, and with the gym closed, I don't know where you can recruit anybody.
Yeah, it was a good place. Fred Meyer's was pretty good too. Well,
Okay.
thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Pete.
Sure enough. Take care.
All right, thanks. So moving on to the consent agenda, would any director like to remove any of the items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda will consist of minutes from the regular meeting on November 19th, staff reports from the fire chief, ops chief, and office manager, and numerous thank you cards and pictures, and the consent agenda is approved. And now we'll review monthly financials for all three agencies.
All right, thank you, Chief. I only have a few things to report tonight. Last month, the directors requested that we invite the auditors to tonight's meeting, but they're busy finishing our audits and they're hoped to be done on time by the end of the month, and they will be here next month to present the audits and answer any questions. And I know one of the things that was heavy on a lot of the directors' minds was how the tax revenues would come in this year. And I'm happy to say that they're almost spot on. They're as of right now, middle of December, they're actually dollar-wise a little ahead of last year. Percentage-wise, they're to budget, they're down just about 1 point, but we're there. So that's great news. Other than that, I am available for questions. I don't really have anything other than that to report.
So
Gina, I just had one maybe for you and the chief. Did we decide to defer on the defibrillators, purchasing those?
Yes, we did.
If so, I wondered if that's something that we could look into trying to get a grant for, that type of medical equipment. If we have time now, because we're not going to buy them right away, I just wonder if that's something we can see if there's some kind of a grant out there for medical equipment we might be able to pick that up under.
I've never heard of one for monitors, but we can certainly look. I don't know, Matt, have you heard of one?
The problem is they generally don't give grants to ambulance districts. If we were combined, we would have more of an options for the grants. With fire being involved with it, it's just the nature of the grant system. They don't generally give it to EMS because there's a higher propensity to the private sector.
Well, yeah, and like EMS wouldn't have a defibrillator.
Yeah, I can't explain the logic. I can only explain what I know.
Okay.
Well, I wondered as a healthcare district, so as we do qualify as a healthcare district, maybe we could.
There's some previous grants through CARES, and then as the government continues to push out more money, that's why I've been pretty diligent about looking with that, and same as the staff with Western Lane, that yeah, if we can piggyback these onto grants, absolutely, it'd save money.
Great, thank you.
Folks, I'm curious, does that mean WLFEA cannot apply for the grant?
It's possible. We'd have to look into that.
Well, I really think we should.
Yeah.
I mean, WLFEA is the parent,
Yeah.
and,
That would make sense.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Director Farnsworth, I think did you have a question?
Just regarding overtime, it appears we're $18,800 over in overtime between supervisors and staff.
Yeah, this past year we got the employee out on workers' comp, and then we had employee out on sick leave, extended sick leave with a knee replacement. And then we had several employees out on COVID-related sick leave. So we've had more people out this year. But yeah, definitely, I agree. Our overtime is up this year as compared to the last 2 years, year to date. Any other questions on the financials? Okay. Moving on to item 8. So, last couple months we've been working with the SVFR board on donating the Dodge Durango to Swiss Home. State law requires that we hold a public hearing prior to donating any equipment to another agency, and we have to publish that notice of the hearing in a statewide publication. So we did place a notice on December 2nd in the Daily Journal of Commerce. And I don't know how many of our directors read that. I'm sure Ron does. That sounds like a bank thing. But we will now, we will now open the public hearing. Are there any comments from a member of the public concerning the donation of the surplus Dodge Durango to the Swiss Home Deadwood Fire Protection District? Hearing no public comments, I'll now close the public hearing. And then we can move right into old business, where the first item is to approve a resolution finalizing the transfer of the Durango to Swiss Home. John, you have a question?
Yes, under the public hearing, we have Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue. Under the resolution, we have WLFEA. Shouldn't those be the same?
No, it was, yeah, the WLFEA is on the resolution. That was at the request of our attorney. The public hearing is does SVFR want to go through with that? The SVFR board has agreed to donate that. So the public hearing was on behalf of, so the SVFR board could hear any public comments. So I think we're okay. I understand the confusion. So the first item for the old business is to approve a resolution finalizing the transfer of the Durango to Swiss Home. We have a resolution prepared, and it was recommended by our attorney that this would be a WLFEA board item, just like I told John. So even though it is SVFR equipment. So I'm looking for a motion and a second from WLFEA board members only to approve resolution 2020-03.
Polisi, I recommend that we move forward.
Okay, so that was Jim Polisi with the motion.
Spato second.
Okay, any discussion? So all in favor, WLFEA board members in favor of the resolution, say aye.
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 Okay, it passes. Thank you, John. Now we want to move to, we wanted to move the discussion on the strategic business plan. So we're swapping 9B and 9C. There is an agenda item for 9C. And this is open, this is a discussion open to all directors from all agencies. John, go ahead.
Well, I'll start it. I just want to say, I think it's time we fish or cut bait. We need to decide as directors how we're going to move forward. And if we intend to merge these departments, let's build our strategic plan accordingly, put some timeline in it, some dates and things, how we're going to proceed, instead of building 3 strategic plans.
John, I agree with you. I have the question, however, do we need to spend some time really doing more of a feasibility analysis first? Financial, operational, I think we all believe feasibility is strong, but from a standpoint of our demonstration to the public of our fiduciary responsibility, before we spend the effort to abandon everything else and go that direction, should we do the analysis first?
I agree, Ron. I just want to get everybody on the same page, and let's build one strategic plan that we believe in and we're going to follow for at least the next 5 years.
Typically, those are two separate studies, a feasibility of merger or as compared to a strategic plan. We certainly could do those, but I know ESCI considers those different, and I assume that LCOG would consider those two different studies.
Well, I'm of the opinion, Chief, that a feasibility study could be done internally. I think
Yes, we could certainly do that.
With staff, and certainly if board wanted to volunteer as far as any efforts. But I don't think, I mean, I know this is not super simple, but I think that maybe we may be overthinking it if we think we have to have a third party to facilitate feasibility only.
And we've done some of that already, so I think it could fall into, you know, the timelines we generated and just flesh out a little bit more financially what it means. Yes.
Yeah.
Alan Burns, your thoughts, please.
I agree with Ron. I think we can do a lot of it in-house and produce a lot of the documents and the ideas.
Mike Webb?
To get off the beach here, I agree with Ron. I think feasibility is a proper way to go, and I do think we have the tools in-house. The tricky part is legally, how do we, or how would you formulate a district with not exact overlapping boundaries where one service is outside the other? And my question is, do we need expertise on how we would tax different areas or not outside of our expertise?
That's actually pretty easy. Definitely would get expertise, but you can set up tax zones just for those situations.
Oh, you can. Okay. Yeah. If you've already answered that question, then that is not that hard.
Ned?
Well, I think that, you know, Ron has a good point, and it's something that we can do ourselves. And I think we need to figure out, the biggest question we've had is if we do a full merger, what does that mean to the tax base? And I think once we can answer that question, then we can decide how we want to move forward. You know, that was one of the biggest questions we faced, is financially, what is going to be a better situation for the districts as well as the taxpayer? So I think once we answer that question, we'll have a pretty good idea of how we want to continue forward as a strategic plan.
Oh, and John, may I?
Sure.
And Ned, you brought up an interesting point as far as the taxpayer, to the point of, to me, the thoughts are is everybody will be taxed equally. Not, and somebody was talking about in this, John, of different tax districts or different rates. I think that, in my opinion, would be a death to this idea of the two mergers. It's going to have to be everybody's fair and equal. I mean, that's what took place with the when the two fire departments here in the late 90s, early 2000s did.
On that one, Alan, the reason to go with the two different areas or two different rates are the geographic footprints of each district, and you wouldn't have, and there's no way that Sisaw Valley could expand out into Mapleton and Deadwood without going through a lot more work.
With a lot more work with Swiss Home and Deadwood things, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the issue.
So a blended rate, perhaps, where the county areas that are outside of SVFR right now would be taxed at a Western Lane rate, and then they would have their own fire districts. That would be what we're talking about. Then where our two districts overlap, everybody would be taxed at the same rate.
Yeah, and that was when Ned brought up as ours interesting what it is, and seeing that's the prime example. Everybody where they're both overlapping has to be equal. The other places where one doesn't, that's understandable.
Yeah.
But that discussion we will have in our feasibility study. I'm just trying to figure out now Jim, could you give us your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a feasibility study is necessary and it can be done within house. I really don't think we need to go outside. There's some pretty good people on both boards that I think we can come to an agreement in the proper direction to go with, the legal input from the attorneys.
Rick?
Yeah, I like that idea of doing the feasibility first with the financial and the technical side of how you combine districts and so forth. And then it might fit in well with LCOG as well, because we will probably defer for a few months the strategic planning, so you could get the feasibility done first. And then that'll dictate what we do in strategic planning. So I agree with that. I think it's a good idea.
So would Siuslaw Valley Fire like to designate a person that we'll start a feasibility study committee, and then Western Lane Ambulance and WLFEA can each appoint somebody to meet with the chief, and we figure out how we're going to get this rolling?
Absolutely. I think that's great. That's the way to go, guys, gals.
Are you volunteering, Jim?
Well, it appears that way.
I'd like to comment. I think
I would be honored.
I'd like to make a comment. I think that we have several different challenges in front of us. One is, of course, the different geographic boundaries of the two districts, but we also have a wide gap between having a cohesive understanding with our labor groups, and these recent negotiations have shown how wide that chasm is. And so I'm concerned that a merger would just be a vehicle for papering over the cost problems that both districts have. So I think part of the feasibility study needs to be, what more will these districts gain in terms of services and quality for the public, for the taxpayer, than what they're getting right now?
Larry, once we establish a committee, that committee, I'm sure, will ask for recommendations from all board members of how we want to proceed and what they want to see. I would just like to get people on the committee tonight.
I would have to agree with all the board members' comments. I mean, we got to come together and work this plan through. And Larry, you bring up an incredibly good point. We need to stay fiscally sound, but we need to change a service model that's going to be best for all those that reside here in both districts and those that visit here. So I really think that this committee coming forward, we can flush a lot of this out. And that's just my opinion.
Ned, do you want to ask your board who they want to appoint?
Well, it sounds like we've already got Jim.
You accept that, Jim?
Yes, I do.
Western Lane Ambulance, who would you like to have as our representative?
Uh-oh.
Frozen? Just you, Jim. It's just you.
Oh, yeah. Great. Thanks.
Rick, you want
I would
to volunteer?
Yeah, I'll
Rick
volunteer to
Yesney.
do that. Okay.
Sounds like it's Cindy since she's not here.
Paulina, are you having, I saw Ron Green raise his hand. Is there going to be two members of each board on this group with the chief? What are we doing exactly?
Ron, do you want to be?
I think two. I think two is a great idea.
Well,
It would be a, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, I just think that each group should have someone who is operationally, aware of things. That Jim is a great example, just because of his vast experience with operations in different levels, and then someone who is a financial person on each side. So we have, operational perspective from each side as well as financial.
Mike Webb, would you want to help Rick Yesney with that?
Sure, we can plan golf tournaments at the same time.
Oh, awesome. WLFEA, Sam Spade, would you like to do that?
You know, I can't commit right now to it because of personal stuff I got going on the time wise for it. So I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I will do it with WFEA, and we'll ask Cindy if she wants to do it also.
Question on that one. If we get into that, if we have 3 from each board, we got to declare it as a public meeting. I'm all right with that, but just got
Well,
to make
let's
sure
just
that.
have one from WFEA and I'll do it.
Sounds good.
And Chief, could we set up something and get together after the first of the year?
Of course.
We might email everybody and find out when's a good time for a Zoom meeting so we can get this rolling. I really want to get us moving forward in the correct direction.
Okay.
And that's why I asked Mr. McAllister about the calendar, because if we're pushing this into April and May, then there's an election, there's all kinds of other issues. It'd be nice if we could have this thing done by May.
Jacob, I would like to invite you, if you can sit in on this feasibility study committee occasionally and see what you would charge us to help us with that and maybe get us on the right page.
Yeah, I think the sort of the slow ramp up that I'm hearing here, and by the way, this is, I just get excited by what I'm hearing here. One, just the sort of motivation to move and get things done, but also the collaborative sort of spirit here. And I think, you know, I was just looking at, and this was in the proposal, the recommendation that we called out was it's time to begin researching what an expanded affiliation between the 2 districts could look like. Objective. By the end of the planning year, we will submit a summary that details the operational, financial, and logistical considerations involving an operational merger of the 2 organizations. And so this is an objective that you have in place and you're enacting it, and starting the strategic planning process with data, with that feasibility analysis is going to be so much more meaningful than having a lot of questions bounced around in meetings and nobody knowing the answers. I also wondered if this early survey could also align, if you have interest in including elements in that survey that are related to, I don't know if feasibility is strictly financial and strictly operational, but maybe there could be other components to it. I don't want to muddy the waters, but yeah, let's be in touch. We'll be happy to help out with that initial piece.
Chief?
Yes.
Is it okay if we invite Matt to do this with us?
Of course.
Would you please, Matt? Thank you.
Dina.
Yeah, I have a comment about the directors that were just appointed to this committee. Director Murphy, you are an elected official for Western Lane Ambulance, so having you, Director Yesney, and Director Webb does create a quorum, and would therefore, even though you would be representing WLFEA, you're elected as Western Lane, and that would constitute these meetings to be public meetings.
That'll be fine. We just won't have anybody from WFEA, and we'll just move forward with the 2 boards and the feasibility, because I don't believe WFEA has to be involved in the initial of this anyway.
No, but we'll have 3 Western Lane directors.
No, John wouldn't meet with the 2.
No, I'm not going to do it.
Oh, you're not going to do it.
WFEA
Okay.
board will not be involved.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Dina.
Well, Jim Polisi's there, so sort of.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's Jim.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Do I need to, well, hang on. Do I need to write a statement of removal from WLFEA during this?
No.
No.
You can represent
that's
both people.
fine.
You're fine.
You're representing the fire department. WFEA is not going to be represented.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Are there going to be any more questions for Mr. Callister, or can we let him go if he would so chooses?
I think we can. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob. You're welcome to stay, or you can leave.
I hear the kids screaming as we speak, so I'll go help out. Thank you, though. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to hearing from you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Moving on to old business.
Chief,
yes.
One quick thing now that Jacob's not here. one of the thoughts I had was that, we're inviting him to be part of this feasibility discussion. I wonder, in terms of if we're actually seriously looking at anyone else, whether we should invite them to be part of this feasibility discussion, just in order to keep things fair. Or are we, I kind of feel like we've already decided it's going to be Jacob, because we're sort of injecting him into the conversations we're going to be having. So it kind of gives him an unfair advantage, I think.
We actually do have an agenda item for that. I think. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, it was this is between ESCI, who we had a presentation a couple months ago, and LCOG. That's all we could find. But that's all who we brought in to discuss strategic planning process. Hadn't talked about feasibility studies, but I assume no matter, I don't know that LCOG would do it for free. I know ESCI would not do it for free. But I'm sure both organizations would be willing to help. So I think we could have a discussion, who do we want to move forward with on the strategic planning process, and make feasibility study part of that as well. Do we want to use LCOG? Do we want to use ESCI, or do we want to do it all internal?
My thoughts on that are, I think doing something completely internal in terms of the public and the stakeholders, I always think it looks better when you have an outside or third party who's part of this process. And I think us coming up with a feasibility study and the strategic plan that involves someone who is objective from the outside would go a long way in the public's eye of us doing the right thing, and the reasonings for us deciding to, whether it's a full merger or not a full merger. I think involving a third party would be good. I feel comfortable with Jacob. He's also much less expensive. Personally, I think we could probably do the whole thing ourselves. I think there is a value and a merit to including a third party if we can.
I agree with President Hickson on that. Absolutely. Have a third party in there.
Sure. I'm a little worried about the timeline. We've been trying to get him in for a presentation for several months here. I know they are busy, but maybe if we sign an agreement with them, then we could lock in a time frame. But
concur.
Well, it sounds like some of the homework is our own to be done.
yes.
Yep.
So if he could move it up a little bit, maybe our homework would be done. But I agree with Director Hickson. We need a third-party objective look at, whether this makes sense, because we all have our own bias. And it would be important not to go down the path to a merger to find out later, oh, it's not even possible.
Right.
It's totally impractical from an economic standpoint, or there aren't the synergies that we think there will be. If we don't have a third party objectively looking at it, it's pretty hard to second check our own, assumptions.
Yeah.
I would agree with Larry. Definitely. Flesh it out on all ends and see what's, best for everyone.
So I'm getting a consensus.
Would be,
Go ahead, Ron.
right. I just wonder too, though, if an independent third party is going to have the necessary bias to evaluate this, because frankly, this needs to be a lot more than black and white.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the driver of considering this consolidation is not about money. I mean, of course it's about money, but it's about the delivery of the service to the residents and the visitors of our community. And I hope that it doesn't, but the quality of service might cost more. I don't know. I hope our goal is to keep the cost down. But if a third party doesn't have the local knowledge, the bias that I think is valuable, is it going to come down to, well, guys, this doesn't make financial sense, so don't do it.
Well, ultimately ultimately we're the ones who get to decide whether we're going to consider his, if he says, no, that's not a great idea, that's up to us.
Yeah, then we've told the public we were going to involve this third party, but we're going to ignore this person's advice. And then,
but then on the other hand, when we're talking bias, when this talk about a merger all started, There were board members that are biased. They started it. There's going to be a lot more bias from the board members how we're going to move forward than I think they're going to let on. I don't think it's all, and the bias being, like you say, Ron, I truly believe everybody wants to be able to deliver a better goods of service to our taxpayers. And inevitably that's going to cost us more money. So I think the service, like you say, Ron, is number one. Financial is number two. And I believe this committee can come out of there with feasibility to make some recommendations to the rest of us board members on the correct thing to do. And after the feasibility study, if you people tell us, no, a merger is not the way to go, then we either got to regroup and we decide, are we going back to Western Lane Ambulance District and Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue as two entities, or how we're going to proceed. And I have faith in you four people that you're going to lead us in the right direction. But I think having somebody like Jacob, it doesn't have to be him, his ears and eyes to keep us centered, I think will help.
Yeah, I agree. And with someone with his experience who may think of things that we hadn't thought about, coming at it from a different direction, to me, I think is invaluable to, even if it's just a gut check to some of the things we already think are the right things.
I think too, we have to consider that this is going to be budget season. I think we've talked about committing to having a joint committee with the union talking about financials. There's going to be a lot of work going on this spring. So the help of a third party, I don't know how we get it done without a third party giving us some assistance.
Not to cause hate and discontent, but we all know the chief and Matt feel eventually a full-blown merger is the best for our community to pool our resources. So if we have somebody like Jacob, when the chief and Matt give us all of these wonderful reasons why it's going to be so good, Jacob has seen things like this in other communities, and maybe he'll, like Ned said, he can ask questions that us board members wouldn't think of.
That's a very, very valid point.
Anyway,
Don, I totally agree. I mean,
and I'm not saying it has to be Jacob. I
get it.
I've worked with him at the planning level for the city of Florence. He's a thorough, very professional individual, and won't talk over you people. He'll listen and won't say a lot unless asked.
And to pick up on what Larry said, the labor groups need to understand that we're trying to do what's best for our customers. It's not about them, it's about the customers. And we need to let people know that if you're going to work for this organization, yeah, you will be compensated appropriately. And yes, we want to make sure that there's enough money for you to do your job and do it professionally. We don't want to cut any corners. And we all know where we sit on the map. You look at us, we're isolated. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We're stronger as one. If we're two, we're shortchanging the community. That's just how I feel.
And Chief, I think this is a good segue into, old business item B, Western Lane Ambulance District action item. I truly believe that we ought to get through the feasibility study and that committee give us some kind of an idea of what they think we're looking at for tax rates if we merge, if we don't. And then after we decide that, I think it's too premature right now to talk about hiring somebody to help us with the levy option. I'd like to get through the feasibility study that committee make a recommendation to us, and then we figure out what we're gonna do.
Hey, John, that makes me nervous, and I'm very apprehensive about losing the levy and having a gap without having that operational levy.
Well, I understand, Mike.
And I would rather go out at today's level of the levy than not. And if it comes back that we need more money, we can go back again within the next year. But to sacrifice that opportunity, I think that is a mistake. And I believe time is of the essence. If I had my druthers, we would have been out on this levy either last November or last May. We should have been a year early for it. We really shouldn't let the gap go. But we have. So this is where
aren't we still a year early, Mike?
we are at the deadline. So if we
doesn't expire
vote in
till May of 22.
But we don't have opportunity to continue to vote over and over again. I mean, you have to be proactive and you need to be in front of it. You can't let it get to the end of the levy and vote and have that potential of it failing and you down onto your savings as your only resources. And we're getting closer. The more we kick the can down the road, the closer we're getting to that level. So I would strongly recommend. Last time we went out a year early for it intentionally because we wanted to have a fallback position if we had to go back and recoup and regroup and propose a different levy amount.
Well, we have that. November 21 is what we're talking about. We don't need to hire a consultant 11 months before the election. We can do exactly what Director Murphy suggests. We can do this feasibility. We can.
Larry, I stand by my recommendation. I get in front of it.
Don't interrupt me, Mike. I was just
actually, Larry, you did it. You did interrupt me. I had the floor.
Okay.
I mean, quite seriously, it's not all about you. I'm trying to protect the district. I've been down this road before, and I don't want to go down it where we don't have that money. So,
Mike, a question. Are you suggesting we try to get our stuff together and go out in May and then use November as our fallback?
I would vote in May, yes. I would absolutely vote in May if it's possible because you have a smaller turnout. You usually only have the older people vote, and the response is typically very good for the district. When you go in November, you're going up against statewide elections and everything else, and it changes the complexion of the voters. So May is a much better, much more successful opportunity for the district.
Can I have the floor?
Yes.
I'm done.
Okay, so the last meeting we spoke about November 21 being our first opportunity to vote and May of 22 being our second opportunity to vote. That's what we talked about. So I think it's perfectly prudent for us to go ahead and do the strategic planning we have neglected to do as a board for a very long time. It's an open question whether this board or individual board members can support the levy at all. So a rush to judgment on putting it on an early ballot before we've even determined the direction of the district is just not appropriate. I respect Mike's view, but I have a different view. I think we have long postponed the feasibility and strategic planning we need to do. We need to have a clear vision of what it is we're asking the voters to accept.
Chief, can you refresh my memory? Did we get a formal proposal from LCOG on helping us with the levy also?
No, they don't do that.
So we only have the one proposal?
From Liz Loomis, that's correct.
We did reach out to LCOG and special districts, and special districts came back. They said they could help us with the forms, but not the marketing. And they do have someone in LCOG, his name's Howard Schuster, who was going to contact me, but I did not hear back from him. And I have a feeling it's the same situation as special districts where they can help us with the forms, but not the marketing.
I just want to make sure, maybe I'll run by what I understand how this works and tell me if this is right or wrong. So the operating levy ends December of 2022.
Correct.
We can go out November of 2021 and then go out again in May of 2022, as long as we have an election on the operating levy that can be in place by July 1 of 2022, which is the beginning of that tax year. So they can assess it during that tax year. That's my understanding. And then you have to work 80 days, at least 80 days back, because you have to have a ballot title to the election division that's been approved 80 days prior to the election. So if we were to go out in November, we really have to know, we have to decide on our rate. And if it's going to be the same rate, you can re-up the same title probably by the end of July. We have some time if we decide we're going out in November. And so we have two shots at it. And actually, I think we went out in 2016 before, which is 5 years ago. So it's the same timing for the prior operating levy. In this case, I think we really do have time to go through a process before we decide. And
Interesting thing on that, though, if we let the levy, essentially, if we go to November of 2021 and we fail, we no longer have a levy. So we're not renewing a levy. We're going back for another operating levy that next May.
Why can't we re-up for the same levy in May of 2022?
Because it will have expired. The levy will have expired.
Well, it doesn't expire till December of 2022.
No, well, it was a 5-year levy. It was put in place that we went out.
Well, I guess that's why I'm asking, because Chief, can you verify, does that expire December of 2022?
That is my understanding.
It should be
that's
fiscal year,
key.
though.
So we have to know that. I think that's a critical piece. So if that is, I think we have two shots at it starting in November.
But my recall is it was a 5-year levy. We went out in 2016.
Correct. And so the thought was that we go out in 21 again.
So we went out in 2016, but it wasn't effective till January of 2018.
No, it went right into effect as soon as the next tax year.
Okay, so we need to get that date for sure.
July of 17, it was the.
So when does it expire?
So the ballot measure says it begins 2017-2018. That was the ballot measure that was voted on November 8th, 2016. And it shows an estimated quantity through 2021. So if we voted in November 8th, 2016, then 5 years after that would be November 2021. That would be my understanding.
Is that what you believe, Mike?
At the very latest, yeah. But we went out a year before. Our levy was for 5 years, but we went out in year 4 to make sure we had it. So you don't have that gap. They're just if it falls off, you're going out for a new levy. You're not going out for a renewal of the levy. But the uncertainty in budgeting and the amount that this makes up of our budget, I get really apprehensive of not having that going forward. So I would be as proactive as you can. You can go out again if the strategic planning comes back and says we're going to do something completely different. Then we go out for a new levy anyway. If strategic planning says we do a full-blown merger, the levy's moot. We're going out for a whole different tax base, and we no longer have to go out for levies. So that's the crux of this, is the financial stability of the district going forward, and I don't want to risk that, and I would rather have as many bites as I can get. Who knows what's going to go on with our economy and our COVID world here.
So my question, directors, I would like to have our whole board here when we vote on this. Can we have the chief send out the dates and everything, when it expires, and his recommendation. And we have a special meeting when everybody is available, even before our next board meeting, as early in January as we can, so we can discuss this and vote on it.
Sure. I think that date is key. I can see where Director Webb would be extremely nervous, and I would be too. My assumption was we had actually 3 more shots at this if we went out in May of this coming year. So
that's what I thought too.
If those assumptions are wrong, we need to get right on it.
That's what I thought too also, Rick.
It's key.
And my assumption is the same, and I think it's semantics whether or not it's an option. I mean, if the levy doesn't pass in November of 21, then we haven't done our job. Okay? I mean, it seems to me that if we do a good strategic planning process, we've looked at the feasibility, you've still got another opportunity to put it in front of voters, but we don't even know what they're going to be voting on. All we're trying to do is put a Band-Aid on this thing. So we already talked about these dates. If Chief wants to re-verify the timing, I do think we have 3 bites at the apple, but do we have to take every bite? No. We can do our strategic planning and feasibility and still have 2 bites at the apple, November of 21, just like it was recommended in our packet, and a second one in May of 22. This whole picture will be a lot clearer then.
Chief, would you verify everything for us, please?
Absolutely.
And then get back to us. And I want Cindy here when we have our final discussion on this and our vote. I want everybody available. And let's do this in early as January as we can, please, Chief. Is that agreeable to Mike and Larry and Rick?
Sure.
I'm fine with that.
Thank you, guys.
Hello.
Okay. So then we'll skip levy rate and communication support.
Yeah, can you send us a supporting document for the levy rate in our packet? So we got that.
Yeah, okay. So moving on to new business. This Western Lane action item is to ratify the collective bargaining agreement with IAFF Local 851. The employees have ratified it on their end. We presented the changes at the last board meeting, so we're just looking for a motion to approve the contract, the new contract as written from Western Lane Ambulance District.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? So Mary, can you do a roll call vote for Western Lane Ambulance District?
Yes. Director Farnsworth,
No.
Director Yesney,
Yes.
Director Webb,
Yes.
Director Murphy.
Yes.
Okay, passes 3-1. The next new business item is SVFR. Action item is to approve the purchase of a fit test machine. This is a machine that we use to test SCBA masks, and we can also use it to test N95 masks. Testing our SCBA mask is a requirement. It's a federal requirement, so that's something we have to do. And our current equipment is rapidly approaching end of life. And well, Matt, you've been looking into this. You want to say anything about that?
No, your summary is spot on. It's the end of life, and we don't currently have the availability to do N95 testing within the districts. This would give us the opportunity to do N95 testing. Given the current climate that we're in with COVID, it'd be great to actually have that testing available within our districts and offer it to other public safety within their community.
And we are going to be reaching out and see if we can get this covered by a grant through the CARES. We feel this is right up the COVID alley of grant proposals, so we are going to try and get refunded for that.
How much does this cost?
It is in your board packet. It was $16,080. And that would come out of, we're proposing that comes out of capital.
When was the last time we purchased that?
Over
been a
10
while.
years ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say, been a long time.
Yeah, we could upgrade this machine. However, the current machine is end of life. So then it gives us a 5-year window to get replacement parts if something were to break. So we would have to replace the machine anyways. So it's just better actually to go through the whole, purchase the new one with the upgrade with a 5-year warranty on top of it.
What does the upgrade include?
It would just upgrade where we can do the N95 testing.
Oh,
'Cause
okay.
we currently cannot do the N95 testing with the machine that we have. We can only do the fit testing SCBA.
Right. Well, I mean, considering, I mean, considering the possibility that, we may get a vaccine for this virus, but it could evolve into something else, and the continued use of N95 masks and other things, to me, for the safety of our firefighters and everyone else, to me, it makes sense to make the purchase now, especially since, I mean, it's been 10 years, since we got the last one.
Mr. Board President, I'll make a motion for the capital appropriation of $16,080 to purchase the respirator fit test machine.
Okay, can we get a second?
I'll
Second,
Spade a second.
Police concur. I got a question. Can that also be used by Western Lane people to make sure that they're tight too?
I assume everything that we do with the districts, we try to cross-share, and especially when it comes to safety and using equipment like that, yes. And they've
Thank
even
you.
offered it to the police department as well because they have to use more masks out and about. It's really to all the public
Perfect.
safety.
The more the better.
To give proper acknowledgement, can we put that down as Jim Spade or Sam Polisi?
Sorry.
Yeah, we got Jim as a third.
Yeah, or a half.
So we've got a motion, a second and third. All SVFR board members in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Okay, director comments. Do we have any directors that would like to comment?
Spade would like to say something. I'd like to thank the staff for this past year of putting up with me, my learning curve, and helping me try to understand. And I'm still, a lot of times, don't know what you guys are talking about, the acronyms and stuff, but I appreciate everybody bearing with me while I'm trying to learn what we're supposed to be doing here and the best way to do it. So thank you very much. Have a great holidays.
Oh,
Sam, you're doing a great job, Sam.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask, because I'm sorry we throw around those acronyms. And in fact, Cindy emailed me today, what's LCOG? So I had to explain. So that's why I started spelling it out. But
I think fellow directors, we need to come up with our own acronyms and start blasting back towards the staff.
Okay.
Chief, I do have a comment.
Jim, go ahead.
I would really like to see a drill done with our backup dispatch center and to get that thing up and running to make sure and pull in our PD dispatchers to make sure that they know how it functions. And, whether they do a 5-hour tour on it or whatever,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that it's up and running.
I've been asking for that since about I got here, and I found out we had the backup dispatch center. It's a work in progress, Jim, but I agree 100% that it needs to be tested to see if it works.
Thank you. And under emergency power, by the way.
Correct.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, this has been a really challenging year, and I really appreciate all of the efforts of the staff as well as the board members in adjusting to all the changes, from going to live board meetings to Zoom meetings and getting us the information that we need. And it was I think of the meetings that we had when we first started, and they were, kind of watching comedy in action. And now we've gotten to the point where we can actually, communicate well and make our points. And I just want to thank everyone for their patience in adjusting to this new way of reaching decisions and communicating together. And I really appreciate everyone's effort, from staff to board members on all three sides.
Well said.
And just one comment. I'd like to thank all 9 other board members for trying to be civil and getting along, because I'm going to warn you, I'm not going through another budget cycle as budget chair and be a mediator for the budget committee. I won't do it. So be thinking about either get along or you're going to have to find a new budget chair.
We love you, John. You're a good man.
The ultimate threat.
Not a threat. Not a threat.
It's a promise.
I just don't feel there is any need for us to interrupt each other, yell at each other, and not be polite and civil.
And we've got enough of that outside of the Zoom box here. So.
Yeah. Amen. I'd like to comment on the, so I heard from the family, we got these really great letters in here from the family that had the near fire in the house. I guess they actually did have a fire up the chimney flue area. You know, how cool is it to get a card that says, "I really like to thank you for saving our house from a child after a fire." And then the picture of the fire engine and the kid that said, "I want to be a firefighter like you." I mean, there's your recruitment start, maybe, you know, I don't know. But that is really just awesome. And I was able to talk to a relative of that family, and they, outside the family, but a relative that was so impressed with the way the fire department handled the fear of the children in particular, letting them know, I think they had a heat sensor, let the child know that there was no heat in there because one of the girls was the daughter was a little worried or afraid to go back and sleep in her house that night. I think it was just really a cool story, and trust me, it's getting around town. So kudos to SVFR and the firefighters for jumping.
That's not the best part. That was Nick Reamer. He's a golf pro out at the golf links.
Yeah.
We got free golf through April.
Yeah, you got extra compensation. Expect a 1099 on that.
Well, yeah.
So
and I noticed they didn't offer it to the ambulance crew, though.
No, they as well. It was everybody. Well, Matt and I have taken advantage of it already. But
perhaps, Chief, in the future, on your consent agenda, if we have some really good comments or the comments from people that gotten service from the fire department or the EMS, that maybe we have that outside of the consent agenda where we can discuss that and say some good things about that, have it on the record.
Absolutely. We can do that at any time, Sam. That's a great idea.
You know, at times when there's not much going on in the way of correspondence, I can sure just include it in there, but it was pretty neat what the kids did for thanking the firefighters.
Yeah, those pictures.
Oh, absolutely. Because you know what? That's going to stick with them through life.
Yeah.
And they're going to be able to replay that story to others in the importance of first responders. It doesn't matter if it's police, fire, EMS, you know, in a person's time of need, it sets an impact for life. And we've got some great people working for both organizations. I mean, phenomenal. And I feel that if something happened to me, by God, I may not know it. And if you saved me, great. And if you don't, well, you tried. But I would feel good with their hands on me.
Well, as I've said many times before, once I get through the tunnel heading west, I just feel better because I know I'm in Sayuta Valley territory and Western Lane Ambulance territory.
Jim, that's why I'm glad Matt's not on the ambulance anymore. He'd just probably get a hold of my neck and squeeze.
Yeah, you and I both.
Okay, any other director comments? Well, everyone have a blessed Christmas and a safe Christmas, and wear your mask. And next meeting is January 28th. Other than that special meeting, which I will get together, John.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.